The morning began as it always did. The wind swept across the vast fields of the farm, where Max, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and weary movements, woke up before dawn. He always had his old mobile phone in hand to check the weather and any updates that could affect his plans for the day. He was used to this routine, accustomed to his fields, his livestock, and the solitude that brought him both peace and anxiety. Max had grown up on this land, and although he longed to break free from the cycle, working on the farm was his only solace in life. It seemed his entire world revolved around a constant loop. Land, animals, sun, rain, and again, land. But this morning, when Max stepped out of his house to begin his morning routine, he felt that something was wrong. In the distance among the green of the forest, he saw the indistinct silhouette of a body moving across the field. It wasn't one of his usual cows, but a huge shadow falling on the ground like a threat. He couldn't believe his eyes. In his fields, where wild animals hadn't been seen for many years, stood an elephant. An elephant that didn't belong to his world. And even more than that, it was a creature from another world. Large, heavy, with big ears and enormous legs. It seemed unreal, but its figure was becoming clearer. Max rushed to his tractor to get a closer look, hoping perhaps to catch his breath after the shock he was experiencing. The animal was moving too slowly, as if it were tired or injured, or its legs wobbling strangely, like a person walking without strength. The closer Max got to the elephant, the more he felt that something was wrong. The animal was far too large for his small farm. He stopped the tractor just a few meters away, and his heart began to beat faster when the elephant turned toward him. And that's when Max saw it. The elephant appeared to have fallen to its knees. The animal struggled to lower its head and looked directly at Max. Its eyes were cloudy, and its mouth was filled with heavy, raspy breaths. This was not just a meeting between a wild animal and a farmer. It was something much bigger. Max felt his heart race. He had never seen such a scene before. Frozen in place, he watched the elephant drop its massive head to the ground, sliding along the grass like a helpless creature. Only then did Max realize the elephant wasn't simply tired. It seemed like an animal teetering between life and death. Max quickly got out of the tractor and ran toward it. As scared as he was, his instincts took over. He raised his head, saw the huge ears fluttering in the wind, and took a few steps toward the elephant, trying to figure out what had happened. And then when he was close, the elephant made a strange sound, a low, growling noise, like a frozen note, which made Max stop. It felt like it wasn't just physical weakness. It was a cry for help. The animal needed something that a lonely farmer in the mountains couldn't provide. Max cautiously approached, bending over the enormous body. Memories of his past troubles, those regarding failed harvests and family issues, seemed insignificant compared to what he was going through now. Meanwhile, the elephant looked him straight in the eyes, and Max realized that he had to act, no matter how difficult it was. The animal was still in a deep physical and emotional state. In its gaze, there was despair, but also hope. Max took a deep breath and approached even closer. His hands were shaking, but he placed them on the elephant's back. Far from what one might expect from an ordinary farmer, he felt the animal was truly asking for help. Max knelt, staring at the elephant, unable to believe what was happening right in front of him. He had never dealt with such large animals, let alone a wild one that was so powerful and immense it could easily destroy anyone in a moment. But now this was not a predator. It was simply a creature in danger. Feeling the weight of the situation, Max gently placed his hand on the elephant's neck, hoping his calm might help the animal settle. It remained still, its heavy breathing being the only proof that it was still alive. I have to do something, Max thought, standing before the enormous body. He could tell that the elephant had serious issues, but how could he help such a large creature without the right training? His farm was far from any hospitals or vets, and there were no transport vehicles or tools that could be helpful in such a situation. Max looked around. The ground was covered with grass and moss, the air cool and fresh, but there was no visible help. The only option was for him to do it himself. Memories of a past incident, when he had tried to save one of his cows with a serious injury, came back to it. Back then, he couldn't help. Now he couldn't allow the same thing to happen with this animal. Deep in his heart, Max knew he couldn't leave the elephant to die here. He sat on the ground next to it and started planning his action. His eyes turned back to the elephant, whose face was so close that he could see every breath of the enormous creature. The animal seemed exhausted, its eyes closed, but Max could see them occasionally opening and staring at him with anxiety, as though the elephant was trying to say something beyond just its physical pain. "You're not alone. I'll stay with you," Max whispered, though he knew that it was more for himself than for the elephant. But it was what he needed to keep himself going in this moment. He felt time slipping away. Max stood and started walking toward his house, trying not to be distracted by the wind sound and the quiet steps of the elephant behind him. His mind was in turmoil, the question of how to save the animal, the question of his sacrifice for this cause. Everything merged into one overwhelming wave of anxiety and determination. When Max reached the house, his heart was still racing. He grabbed the first medical kit he could find, which he always kept for his cows, and a heavy rope to try to bind the elephant's wounds or at least restrict its movement to prevent further injury. Max knew this would be hard, but he could no longer just stand by and watch. Moreover, he remembered all those times he had seen how vets approach such situations, calmly, carefully, without rushing. Max tried to imitate their composed behavior, even though everything inside him was screaming in fear. Returning to the elephant, he cautiously began inspecting it. The first thing he noticed was that the animal had severe injuries to its leg, and although the elephant was still breathing, its wounds were clearly the result of something that had happened recently. Max closed his eyes when he saw that one of the legs was badly injured, which explained why the elephant had fallen to its knees. Max took a deep breath and began to act. He spread out his blanket and laid it on the ground to at least create a comfortable spot for the elephant. Then he carefully started to lift the animal's leg to better assess the injury. He saw that the skin was torn and blood was still coming out, though not too strongly. Max felt that every second mattered, and he realized that he had to act quickly. He picked up his phone and dialed the local vet, Rachel, even though he knew she worked far away, and her help might not come quickly. But on the other end of the line, he heard a familiar voice. "Max, what's happened?" she asked. Max took a deep breath before responding. "Rachel, there's an elephant here. I don't know how it ended up on my farm, but it's injured, and I can't leave it. Can you help?" Rachel, as always, was calm, but Max could feel how heavy her words were, as if she already knew what he was going to face. She didn't answer immediately, and the silence between them stretched like a rope about to snap. "Max, you know that an elephant isn't just a big animal you can stop with regular methods. I'll come, but it won't be quick. You need to stabilize it until I arrive." Max felt the cold waves of fear wash over him. There was no room for doubt now. He lifted his head and looked at the elephant, whose heavy breathing still echoed in the silence surrounding them. The animal was weak, but alive, and Max knew that in this situation, time was working against him. "I'll do everything I can," he replied, trying to leave at least a bit of confidence in his voice. He knew that only his hands could save this enormous creature's life now, and the weight of that responsibility was tightening his chest even more. He put the phone back in his pocket and turned cautiously back to the elephant. The animal remained on its knees, breathing heavily, but it showed no aggression. This wasn't an animal you'd see in a circus or zoo. This was an elephant, with all its instincts, intellect, and incredible strength that had all but vanished when it became so ill. Max swallowed and continued his inspection. The elephant's leg was enormous, and the injuries were horrifying. He could see that the animal had not only suffered physical damage, but that its body was beginning to weaken from blood loss. "This doesn't look good," Max whispered, gathering all his strength. He began carefully washing the elephant's wounds, using everything he had at hand: wet towels, old rags, and even water from his own reservoir. Naturally, this couldn't be professional help, but Max had no other choice. Each of his movements was filled with nervous tension. He didn't know if he had enough time to help the animal, if he could save it. The moment when he saw the blood leaking from the elephant's leg, slowly flowing across the ground, was almost a decisive one for him. But the elephant, though it seemed helpless, showed no aggression. It just stood there, as if waiting for something. Perhaps help, perhaps just peace. And in that gaze, Max noticed something he couldn't explain: trust. An animal that could have destroyed everything around it remained neutral, allowing Max to do everything he could. Once again, memories of his youth surfaced, when the farm was still alive with activity and everything around him was calm. But even then, when he tried to solve problems with cattle or crops, he had never faced such a trial. Rachel, as promised, arrived a few hours later. She didn't come alone. She brought a veterinary assistant named John, who had experience working with large animals. Max was ready for them, though with a confused look, he knew nothing could be done quickly. John immediately approached the elephant and began assessing its condition. "This is a serious injury," John said, immediately evaluating the situation. "I don't think we can just take him back into the forest. He's probably very weak, and if he doesn't get proper treatment, he won't survive." Rachel, watching what was happening, sighed. "Max, we'll need to contact the Wildlife Service. If you can't transport him, we may need to ask for help from somewhere else. This isn't just an injury, it's a matter of survival." Max felt his heart start beating faster again. He wasn't prepared for such a turn. He looked at the elephant, now the focus of professional eyes again, and realized that nothing could be as simple as it seemed at first. Now he had to act with resolve, ignoring his own emotions. He lifted his head, met Rachel and John's gaze, and felt that this was his chance. Max stood listening to Rachel and John's words, but his mind was too overwhelmed with emotion. They were all standing on the verge of making a difficult decision. The elephant was clearly on the edge of life and death, and any wrong move could lead to tragedy. Yet he lacked the experience to make a decision that would match the situation. "We can't leave him here, Max," John said quietly, trying not to disturb the silence around them. "He won't survive this. We need to do everything to save him, but we need wildlife specialists' help. We can call the National Wildlife Service, but if they can't get here quickly, he may die." Max looked at the elephant, still kneeling, breathing heavily, but he understood that this moment was a turning point. He could let it all go, hoping others would help, but he felt a deep, inexplicable sense of responsibility. He would have to decide what to do. And now, standing before the elephant, it seemed that this creature, with its extraordinary strength and suffering, was guiding his way. "John, Rachel, I can't just walk away," Max said, his voice firm but still filled with fear. "I can't just watch him die here, on my land. I'll do everything I can. I'll take him myself." Rachel shrugged, looking at him, and her gaze softened a little. "If you do, Max, we'll need to find a way to transport him, and we need to be ready for the fact that not everything will be so simple." Max nodded and looked around. His farm was far from any major roads, and transporting such a massive elephant, even with a truck, would be very difficult. But he was determined. He was ready to do whatever it took to give this elephant a chance at life. And he knew that this time, he would have to take full responsibility. Max walked over to his old tractor, which was parked by the barn. Although it wasn't ideal for transporting an animal, it was the only vehicle Max had that could be used. Calmly, but with determination, he prepared it for work, removing old tools and tossing everything that wasn't necessary for transporting the elephant. Rachel and John helped Max carefully load the elephant onto the truck. Their movements were coordinated, though nervous, as no one knew how this would end. The elephant was enormous and heavy, and even with their team's help, it was very difficult. But eventually, they managed to get the animal onto the transport. "Now we just need to get him to the doctor," John said when they finished the preparations. "We need to be very careful." Max nodded and got behind the wheel. The tractor slowly moved toward the nearest road, where they hoped to find help quickly. But as they left the farmyard, Max suddenly noticed something that made his heart tighten with anxiety. The ground almost slipped out from under him. In the distance, he saw figures, a group of people approaching him. They were moving quickly, and Max could see their faces becoming clearer. They were from the National Wildlife Service. They had arrived faster than he expected, and Max realized that now everything depended on them. But just at that moment, the tractor suddenly shook, and something clicked loudly. Max looked at the back wheel. It was starting to slow down. He turned his head back and saw that the elephant was dead. All that struggle, trust, and teamwork was in vain. "Shit," Max whispered, not believing his eyes. Max sat in his truck, his heart pounding. His gaze was fixed on the back wheel, which continued to slow down. He tried to push the gas to move forward, but the wheel squeaked, and with each step, the movement became harder. The back of the vehicle tilted, and the weight of the elephant on the truck made the situation even more complicated. "Shit," Max shouted, pulling the gear lever, trying to free the vehicle from this position. But nothing helped. The elephant, the huge creature he had tried to save, was dead on his truck, and the feeling that he hadn't given it a chance weighed heavily on him. Rachel and John stood nearby, watching as Max desperately tried to free the truck. John came closer, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. "Max, we need to stop," he said quietly, trying not to disturb the silence that surrounded them. Max lowered his head and silently pressed the gas. He felt his heart squeeze with guilt and helplessness. What could he do? He was the only one there, the only one who decided to help the elephant, but it was too late. Rachel walked up to Max and put a hand on his shoulder. "We couldn't have predicted this," she said, though it didn't sound like an attempt to comfort him. She was telling the truth, but Max no longer felt that there was any justification for what had happened. John bowed his head watching the situation. We tried, but sometimes nature doesn't give us a chance. We can only learn from this experience. Max turned sharply toward John. Lessons? This was a living elephant, John. Its mother is still out there waiting. How can I tell her that we couldn't help? These words hit him harder than he had expected. Max felt despair overwhelm him as he realized that he hadn't done everything he could. He lacked resolve. He lacked time. Rachel fell silent, gathering her thoughts. It seemed like their hope for saving the elephant had vanished, but something in her gaze suggested to Max that he could take one more step. We can still send a message to the Wildlife Service, Rachel suggested. And although we can't turn back time, we can save other lives and maybe do something for the mother creature that's still waiting. We can't leave her without help. Max stood quietly listening to her words. He knew he couldn't bring the elephant back to life, but he could give a chance to another creature, the one somewhere out there in the forest. You're right. I can't leave it like this. If there's even a chance to save another life, I'll do everything I can, Max said with renewed determination. He quickly grabbed his phone and dialed the Wildlife Service, knowing this was their last chance. As Max waited for the answer on the phone, he looked around. The forest was quiet, almost immersed in a sacred stillness. And at that moment, he realized that this path of helping, although it felt like defeat, was actually the only right choice he could make. He could have given up, left it all behind, and just walked away, but that would have been more than just difficult. The elephant was wild and enormous, but so was his connection to it, a bond that demanded action. Finally, the phone picked up. Naturally, we know about the situation. You've done everything you could. The elephant is dead, but we'll arrange help for another animal. If you have information about the mother that's still nearby, we can act quickly. Max looked at the forest stretching before him and realized their journey was far from over. Now he had a task, and he would have to do everything to prevent further tragedy. Max stood, looking at the empty forest. His heart beat in rhythm with anxiety as he listened to the Wildlife Service confirm their plan. He felt the pain of losing the elephant, but it wasn't the end. He couldn't forget what this had all started with, the elephant and particularly its mother. Now it was his new mission, to prove he could do more. Max, if you're ready, we have the first step, John said, approaching him with a serious look on his face. He pointed toward the distant forest where, as Max hoped, the mother might still be. We need to find her, Max replied, scanning the forest. The leaves rustled in the wind, and every step in the silence felt like it was tearing him apart. His heart hadn't settled from what he had gone through, and now a new wave of emotions stirred within him. Anger, pain, and most